So I've seen this take floating around the internet for years now, people pointing at Walter White and going, yeah, that guy would definitely be wearing the red hat. He's angry. He's a middle-aged white dude who feels like the world screwed him over. He wants respect. He builds an empire. Case closed, right? And I get why people land there. On the surface level, there's something that feels right about it. But the more I actually sat with this question and really thought about who Walter White is as a person, what drives him, what disgusts him, what he actually believes about the world, the more I realized that this take is actually way off. Not completely off. There's overlap, but people are pattern matching on vibes instead of actually understanding what makes Walter White tick. So today, I want to break this down properly. Not just is he MAGA yes or no, but looking at all the different components of what that movement actually represents and seeing where Walter actually lands on each one. Because MAGA isn't one thing, it's a coalition of different impulses and grievances and worldviews that happen to travel together. And Walter White hits some of those and completely misses others in ways that I think reveal something really interesting about his character. Starting with the economic angle, because I think this is where people get most confused. Walter White does lean right economically, that's fair. He believes fundamentally that rewards should track with talent and intelligence and contribution. He looks at the world and sees a system that should be meritocratic and gets angry when it isn't. When he thinks about grey matter and how he walked away from billions of dollars, the wound isn't just about money, it's about the fact that his genius built something and other people got the rewards for it. He hates redistribution. He would absolutely despise something like student loan forgiveness. You can just imagine him ranting about it. These people made choices, they signed contracts, they knew what they were getting into. Why should my tax dollars go to bail out people who got degrees in whatever he'd consider useless? He'd have a whole thing about it, and bailouts in general would set him off. The idea that mediocre companies or mediocre people get rescued by the system while talented people get nothing. That's offensive to his entire worldview. He sees himself as someone who played by the rules, did everything right, had more talent and intelligence than almost anyone around him, and got basically nothing for it. Meanwhile, other people fell upward. That's the wound. But here's where it gets complicated. Walter White is not a free market ideologue. He doesn't care about small business as some kind of cultural value. He's not out here celebrating entrepreneurs or the American dream of building something from nothing. He doesn't have any romantic attachment to capitalism as a system. He's actually totally fine exploiting the state when it benefits him. Think about how he navigates the healthcare system throughout the show. Think about how he's willing to use whatever institutional structures serve his purposes. He's not principled about this stuff. He's purely self-interested. And here's the really important part. Walter White doesn't have a problem with monopolies. He doesn't think monopolies are bad. He thinks monopolies are earned. His whole arc in the show is about building a monopoly. He wants to be the only game in town. He wants to crush all competition. He wants total market dominance. That's not populist economics. That's not looking out for the little guy against the big corporations. That's wanting to become the big corporation. So economically, Walter is meritocratic in a very specific elite way. He thinks the best should win and take everything. He doesn't think the working class is getting screwed by elites. He thinks he should have been the elite and got screwed by lesser people who happen to be in the right place at the right time. That's a really different thing than MAGA economic populism, which is fundamentally about regular people getting a fair shake against a rigged system. Walter doesn't think the system is rigged against regular people. He thinks the system is rigged against exceptional people. Against him specifically. That's aristocratic resentment, not populist resentment. Now let's talk about the social and cultural side, because this is where I think people really overestimate the overlap. MAGA has a huge cultural component, right? Traditional values, religious imagery even when the actual religiosity is questionable, defending a certain vision of America against cultural change, strong opinions about gender and sexuality and race and what's being taught in schools and what Hollywood is pushing and all of that. Walter White could not care less about any of this. He's not religious, there's no indication anywhere in the show that faith plays any role in his life. He doesn't go to church, he doesn't pray, he doesn't reference God except maybe as an expletive. When he's facing death, he doesn't turn to religion for comfort. He turns to chemistry, to legacy, to ego. The spiritual dimension of Maga would be completely alien to him. He's not sentimental about tradition either. He doesn't romanticize the past. He doesn't think America used to be great and needs to be restored to some previous glory. He doesn't care about preserving cultural institutions or ways of life. He's actually pretty contemptuous of nostalgia and sentiment in general, and the culture war stuff, gender ideology or critical race theory or whatever the current flashpoint is. Walter would find all of this incredibly boring, not because he has sophisticated progressive views. He probably has some reactionary instincts if you really pushed him, but he doesn't care enough to have strong opinions. It's beneath him. He has chemistry to do. He has an empire to build. He's not going to spend his time getting mad about what pronouns someone uses. His masculinity is often pointed to as evidence of Maga alignment, but I think people misread this too. Yes, Walter has a very traditional and honestly pretty toxic relationship with masculinity. He needs to be the provider, he needs to be respected, he needs to dominate. His ego is wrapped up in being the man of his household and later being the man of his criminal empire. But this is personal. It's about him specifically. He wants dominance in his house. He wants Skylar to defer to him. He wants Jesse to obey him. He wants his enemies to fear him. But he doesn't care about masculinity as a social project. He's not trying to save masculinity from feminism or whatever. He's not fighting for men as a category. He's fighting for himself. He's too private for culture war stuff. Too contemptuous of the masses who get worked up about it. Too bored by anything that isn't directly about him and his interests. The rallies where people chant about owning the libs. The social media fights about cultural decay. Walter would find all of this embarrassing and beneath him. Law and order is interesting because there's a surface level thing that seems like it fits but actually doesn't. Maga has a strong law and order component. Back the blue, tough on crime. Criminals are bad and should be punished. Order is good and chaos is bad. Walter White is a criminal, obviously. But that alone doesn't tell us his political views on crime and punishment. Plenty of criminals think crime is bad when other people do it. So what does Walter actually believe about law and order? He hates being constrained by rules. That's clear throughout the show. Any rule that limits him is experienced as an injustice. Speed limits, DEA regulations, social norms about what a high school chemistry teacher should do. He chafes against all of it. He believes he's too smart and too important to be bound by rules designed for lesser people. But here's the thing, he does believe that order should exist. He's not an anarchist. He's not someone who thinks rules are bad in general. He just thinks rules shouldn't apply to him. When Jesse or his other underlings break rules or act chaotically, it drives him crazy. When competitors don't follow the implicit rules of the drug trade, he's offended. He wants a well-ordered world that he personally stands above. He respects law enforcement when it's competent. Look at his relationship with Hank. There's genuine respect there even when they're on opposite sides. Hank is good at his job. Hank has integrity. Hank follows his code. Walter can respect that even while working to evade him. What Walter can't respect is incompetence in either criminals or cops. He doesn't believe crime is bad. He believes crime is bad when done by idiots. When Tuco acts erratically, or when the dealers on the corner can't follow simple instructions, or when Jesse makes sloppy emotional decisions, that's offensive to Walter. Not the crime itself, but the lack of craft, the lack of professionalism. Crime should be done well or not at all. So he's not really law and order in the Maga sense. He doesn't think criminals are bad people who deserve punishment. He thinks some criminals are competent and some aren't. He thinks some cops are competent and some aren't. It's all about execution, not morality. Now let's talk about institutions because I think this is a really important distinction that gets missed. Maga has a strong anti-institutional streak. Deep state, rigged elections, corrupt FBI, elites pulling strings behind the scenes. The system is run by shadowy forces that work against regular Americans. Walter White is absolutely anti-institutional. He has no faith in institutions, but the nature of his contempt is completely different. He doesn't believe in conspiracies. He doesn't think there's some shadowy cabal running things. He doesn't think the elites have rigged the system against people like him through some coordinated effort. That kind of thinking requires believing that the people running things are actually smart and competent enough to pull off a conspiracy. Walter doesn't believe that. He thinks the system is run by mediocrities. That's his view. Not that there are evil geniuses manipulating everything, but that there are boring average people who stumbled into power and don't deserve it. The administrators at his school, the executives at Grey Matter, the managers and bureaucrats who make decisions, they're not evil, they're just not as smart as him. This is elitist contempt, not populist paranoia. It's a huge difference. Maga says the system is rigged by powerful people against regular folks. Walter says the system is run by idiots who don't recognize genius when they see it. Maga wants to tear the system down and rebuild it for the people. Walter wants to step over the system and prove he's better than everyone in it. He doesn't want to destroy institutions. He wants to transcend them. He wants to operate in a space where institutional rules don't apply to him while everyone else still has to follow them. That's not populist revolution. That's aristocratic exemption. Authoritarianism is where Walter has his strongest overlap with Maga tendencies, and this deserves a longer discussion. Walter White is deeply authoritarian in his personality and behavior. This is undeniable. Look at how he runs his operation. Look at how he treats Jesse. Look at how he relates to his family by the end. He has an obsessive need for hierarchy, with himself at the top. Every relationship he's in has to have a clear power dynamic, and he has to be on a top. With Jesse, it's obvious. Jesse is the student and he's the teacher. Jesse is the assistant and he's the master. Even when Jesse has good ideas or legitimate grievances, Walter can't fully acknowledge it because that would disrupt the hierarchy. Zero tolerance for disobedience. When people don't do what he says, the response is always escalation. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't compromise. He doesn't try to understand their perspective and find middle ground. Disobedience is treated as an existential threat that must be crushed. He punishes disrespect brutally. This goes beyond just enforcing rules. Even perceived slights or failures to show proper deference set him off. Think about how he responds when people don't give him the respect he thinks he deserves. It's not proportional, it's not strategic, it's visceral, and he believes fear is stabilizing. This is key. He comes to believe that the only way to maintain order is through fear. People need to be afraid of the consequences of crossing him. That fear is what keeps everything running. Without it, there's chaos. All of this aligns with the authoritarian personality that finds Maga appealing. The strong leader who doesn't take disrespect. The clear hierarchy where everyone knows their place. The use of fear and dominance to maintain order. But here's the crucial distinction. Walter wants personal authority, not state authority. He doesn't want a strong government imposing order on society. He doesn't want a powerful leader telling everyone what to do. He wants to be that leader himself. Maga authoritarianism is about collective strength. We need a strong leader for us. Walter's authoritarianism is purely individual. I need to be the strong leader for myself. He would hate crowds telling him what to believe or how to act. Even if those crowds agreed with him, even if those crowds wanted to make him the leader, the idea of being accountable to a movement or having to perform for followers would be suffocating to him. He doesn't want to lead a movement. He wants to dominate a territory. Walter is an authoritarian individualist. He wants total control over his domain, but has no interest in extending that control into a political project. He's not trying to save America or lead a revolution. He's trying to build a meth empire and make everyone in it obey him. Nationalism is basically non-existent in Walter White, and I think this is pretty straightforward. No patriotism. Has Walter ever expressed love for America as a country? Has he ever talked about American values or American greatness? Has he ever referenced the flag or the military or any of the symbolic infrastructure of American nationalism? I can't think of a single instance. No America first. He has no particular preference for Americans over anyone else. He'll work with Mexican cartels. He'll sell to whoever's buying. National borders are just logistics problems, not moral categories. No ethnic or national pride. He doesn't have a sense of his own ethnicity as something meaningful. He doesn't identify with white Americans as a group. He doesn't think in terms of us versus them on national or ethnic lines. Nations are abstractions to him. This is important. For a lot of people, nations are deeply meaningful. They're identities, they're communities, they're something worth fighting for. For Walter, they're just arbitrary lines on maps, administrative categories, nothing he cares about. He would cook meth for Martians if they paid him and respected his product. That's not a joke. He has zero loyalty to any group larger than himself and maybe his immediate family. And even the family loyalty gets pretty thin by the end. Populism and movement loyalty is where we find the biggest mismatch, and I want to spend some time on this because I think it's really the core of why Walter White would not be MAGA despite some surface similarities. MAGA is fundamentally a movement, a collective identity, a we. People wear the hats and go to the rallies and feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. They chant together, they share memes, they feel connected to millions of other people who share their grievances and their hopes. That sense of belonging is central to the whole thing. Walter White would find this repulsive. He hates movements, any movement. The idea of signing up for a cause and marching in lockstep with other people, even a cause he agreed with. The collective effervescence of group identity makes him uncomfortable at best and contemptuous at worst. He hates chanting. Can you imagine Walter at a rally, people around him chanting, "Build the wall" or "Lock her up" or whatever? He would be physically uncomfortable. He would think everyone around him was an idiot for getting swept up in this. He might even agree with the sentiment, but the mode of expression would be unbearable. He hates belonging. This is deep in his character. He doesn't want to be a member of anything. He doesn't want to be one of many. He doesn't want his identity to be defined by group membership. When he says, "I am the one who knocks," he's not saying we are the ones who knock. It's purely individual. MAGA is emotionally collectivist. That's not an insult, it's just a description. The emotional core of the movement is about shared identity, shared grievance, shared purpose. We're all in this together against them. Walter is pathologically singular. His whole arc is about becoming someone who stands alone, not part of a class or a movement or a group, just him, Heisenberg, the one. He doesn't want followers in the way a political leader wants followers. Political followers are people who share your vision and work with you toward common goals. Walter wants subjects, people who obey him not because they believe in his cause, but because he has power over them. That's a completely different relationship. The rally psychology of Maga would be deeply alien to him. The feeling of being part of something, the joy of group identity, the comfort of belonging, none of that appeals to him. He wants to be above, not part of. Grievance is interesting because there's genuine overlap here, but also a crucial difference. Yes, Walter feels wronged. That's the engine of the whole show. He's a genius who ended up as a high school chemistry teacher with a car wash boss who disrespects him. He co-founded a company now worth billions and walked away with basically nothing. He has cancer and no way to pay for treatment or leave his family secure. The world has not given him what he deserves. Yes, he believes the system failed to reward him. He did everything right. He was smarter than everyone. He worked hard, he played by the rules, and he ended up with nothing while lesser people prospered. That's a legitimate grievance in his mind. Yes, he externalizes blame. He doesn't think he failed, he thinks he was failed by grey matter, by the education system, by the economy, by whatever forces kept him from achieving his potential. The cause of his problems is outside himself. All of that sounds very Maga, feeling wronged, blaming the system, externalizing failure, but the nature of the grievance is completely different. His grievance is intellectual, not cultural. He doesn't think traditional values are under attack. He doesn't think America is being taken from him. He doesn't feel like his way of life is being destroyed by coastal elites or immigrants or changing demographics. His grievance is purely about his own individual achievement being unrecognized. He blames individuals, not them. When Walter is angry, he's angry at Elliot and Gretchen, at specific people who wronged him specifically. He's not angry at a vague them. Elites, the deep state, coastal liberals, whatever. His enemies are specific and personal. He never frames himself as a victim class. This is huge. Maga grievance is about group victimhood. We as a class of people have been victimized. Regular Americans, working class whites, the forgotten men and women, whatever the framing, Walter never thinks of himself as part of a victimized group. His victimhood is entirely individual. He's not a wronged member of a wronged class. He's a wronged individual who happens to exist in a world full of other people he doesn't particularly identify with. His resentment is aristocratic, not populist. The aristocrat believes he deserves more because he's better than everyone else. The populist believes he deserves more because the game is rigged against people like him. These sound similar, but they're actually opposite in important ways. Let's talk about strongman appeal because this is another area where there's surface overlap, but deeper mismatch. Would Walter respect Trump? In some ways, probably yes. He'd admire the norm breaking. Trump does whatever he wants, says whatever he thinks, doesn't apologize, doesn't defer to the experts, doesn't care about what he's supposed to do. That kind of norm violation is something Walter can respect. He does it himself, but he'd despise the sloppiness. Walter is a perfectionist. He cares about craft. He wants everything done right. The chaos and disorder of Trump's approach to everything would drive him crazy. The tweets with typos, the constantly changing positions, the apparent lack of planning. Walter would find this embarrassing, and he'd hate having to pretend admiration. Even if he found things to respect about Trump, he couldn't stand being in the position of a follower, of someone who has to perform admiration for a leader. That's not his role. He's the one who's supposed to be admired. Ultimately, Walter wants to be the strongman, not cheer one. That's the key difference. MAGA supporters look at Trump and see someone fighting for them, their champion, their guy. Walter would look at Trump and see competition, someone in the position he should be in, someone getting the attention and admiration that should be directed at him. He might prefer Trump to the alternatives. He might vote that way out of self-interest or because he can't stand the other option. But he would never be a true believer. He would never wear the hat. He would never feel like Trump speaks for him. So let me try to synthesize all of this because I think the conclusion is actually pretty clear once you look at all the pieces. Walter White is not MAGA. He overlaps with it on some things. The authoritarian instinct, the anti-redistribution resentment, the contempt for weakness, those are real areas of alignment, but he fundamentally rejects the core of what MAGA actually is as a movement and as an identity. He rejects populism, the idea that regular people as a class deserve better, that we should fight for each other, that there's a we at all. He rejects tribal identity, being part of a group defined by shared characteristics, feeling connection to people just because they're similar to him, any form of group belonging. So no. Walter White would not have been MAGA. He might have voted that way. He might have agreed with some of the policy positions, but he would never have been a believer, never worn the hat, never felt like he was part of something. Because Walter White is never part of something, he's always above it. That's his tragedy and his pride and ultimately his doom. And that's why the comparison breaks down once you really look at it. Anyway, that's my take. Let me know what you think in the comments. I might do Hank next because honestly he's a much more interesting case study for this kind of thing. Or maybe Gus, because there's something really fascinating about how a gay immigrant drug lord maps onto these political categories. Alright, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.